because I don't think the NFL issue is going to be resolved anytime soon. And not only does the NFL protest stir emotions about patriotism, but Ambezi alluded to it earlier, and that's the 800-pound gorilla in the room, and we're going to get to that when we get back from break, and that's the Black Lives Matter movement. So when we get back from break, we'll go into a discussion about the Black Lives Matter movement and how you feel about it and whether you think it's patriotic, and just talk about some of the comments we've been hearing on the street. So when we get back, we'll talk about this in depth, and of course we will share some additional comments from some of our chatters. And so look forward to it. Go back, have yourself a quick chaser, and we will talk to you in a few minutes. You're listening to Straight No Chaser. We'll be right back.
Anyone else?
My name is David, and in 8 years, I'll be an alcoholic.
Hi, David.
I'll start drinking in middle school, just at parties. But my parents won't start talking to me about it till high school. And by then, I'll already be in some trouble.
Kids who drink before age 15 are 5 times more likely to have alcohol problems when they're adults.
The thing is, my parents won't even see it coming.
So start talking.
Who's next?
Before they start drinking.
We all have our own issues. Some people struggle with ADHD, some people struggle with diabetes, but I struggle with addiction. I was at a party when my friends told me to try it. They said it was okay because everyone else was doing it. And so I did. I tried it, and I became hooked. I was only 16 when I lost my friends, my family, and everything I had ever loved. I needed help. I needed support. I needed somebody to tell me that they believed in me, that I could recover. But instead, they called me names like junkie, thief, bum, and loser. It wasn't about the lack of money for therapy. It was about the lack of faith that I had in myself, the lack of faith that was constantly reaffirmed by the people I loved most. The guilt, shame, and isolation made it nearly impossible for me to ask for help. But one supportive friend, and 5 years later, I stand here to tell you, words are more powerful than the substances that we are addicted to.
When used incorrectly, they can set you on a path of indestruction.
But when used correctly, words have the power to heal, nourish, and mold individuals.
If you know someone who is struggling, please seek help.
But most importantly, believe in yourself and believe in your loved ones.
You don't like watered-down issues? Let us serve you the hard stuff. So come on, let's get back to Pastor C, Ambezi, and the Chief.
All right, welcome back.
Black Lives Matter is first and foremost an affirmation. It's a love note to ourselves, from us to us.
It's a movement built on love. We're a movement that is rooted in the principles of human rights, dignity, and respect.
It was founded by 3 black women, Patrice Cullors, Lisa Garza, and Opal Tometi.
It matters about peace. It's about bringing people together. It's about fighting for justice. It's about solidarity. And it's about unity.
Terror and love do not go hand in hand. And unequivocally, without a doubt, Black Lives Matter is a group of people that love each other and love even those who are not engaged in the movement. And so terror has no place among us.
The
check your arguments.
Really educate yourself about what Black Lives Matter means.
Do your research on housing segregation, racial disparities in income and education, and mass incarceration, and you'll realize why we need to say Black Lives Matter. All lives won't matter until Black lives do.
All right. Well, as you just heard, we just had a little clip about the Black Lives Matter movement, which is a movement that's basically been turned up since the Trayvon Martin incident. And some people have labeled it as a terrorist organization, and others have been offended because they perceive the name indicates that only Black Lives Matter. And you also have members of the African American community that originally disagreed with their methods of protesting and all those different things. But my question to you, Money Marv and Chief, is do you think this group is unpatriotic?
Absolutely not. I would say that their level of care is representative of how much they actually love the country. So I would say that they are patriotic. And again, it's like how best you can talk about the issues at hand while still being respectful. And I certainly agree that like the main core of the group do that. And I felt like you kind of were talking about it a little bit before we went on break, but depending on who's putting the hashtags out there, who's trying to like repurpose that information, obviously they're not a part of the main group. But I could say like the overall movement as a whole is patriotic.
And you know, I wanted to go back to something that you said earlier about how in this age you can get on your phone and be a part of a hashtag and now think that you're a part of a movement. Because that is actually a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing because, yes, you have tons of people who support the movement, but like you said, they aren't necessarily at the core of it. And that is what causes a little bit of disarray. And you know, back in the 60s when people were fighting for civil rights, you could not get that confused. You had people in masses marching and protesting for our rights. And Black Lives Matter, they absolutely do that. They absolutely march and they protest and all that stuff. But the difference is you didn't have people on their phones back then to mix and mingle what was going on. Everybody who supported the movement was out there marching. And if they weren't, they were at home cleaning off somebody's shoes who were out there marching. So there wasn't really that much room for getting the message confused. They were fighting for equal rights, and that's how they were doing it. Black Lives Matter, in my opinion, at their core, they definitely strive to bring light to the issues that we as Black people are facing. Whether it's the police brutality or the mass incarceration or the lack of education and the workplace bias, they are trying to bring attention to those issues. But it's just it like the Kaepernick protest, I think it can get lost in translation when people want to throw the hashtag on cases that they know nothing about. So even if at the core they know what they're talking about and they know what they're protesting about, you could have somebody on their phone in Wisconsin who throws out the hashtag under a case where, you know, it doesn't necessarily apply. And if a lot of people get hold of that, they could look at that and be like, wow, so they're saying Black Lives Matter, and look, it turns out that they actually assaulted the cop first. So what is Black Lives Matter really doing? You know, it's very, very easy to have those incidents happen when you don't have people all physically supporting the movement. And so, I mean, in that aspect, it's kind of hard because they do have very, very, very good intentions, and they have done so much for the Black community. But when I ask people about what they think about Black Lives Matter, and, you know, in my intro, I said, you know, you have people of the African American community that disagree with their methods. Those methods were really being so quick to support things that we didn't have full details about. So what do you think about that, Chief?
Well, I think the movement itself, especially when you look at the circumstances surrounding Trayvon Martin,
right,
which is what brought the group into prominence. And that's not to say that they probably weren't doing some things prior to, but certainly they came into prominence during that era. And the whole stand your ground issue and the way it went down, it created a lot of concern in the African American community, because in essence, this young man, if you recall, followed Trayvon through the neighborhood as sort of a vigilante. And so who among us, if you were confronted by a guy that you didn't know, that didn't have any authority, and he pops out of nowhere with a gun, and you are not doing anything other than walking home with a bag of Skittles in your pocket, who among us wouldn't resist that?
Oh yeah,
as
I'm
you
out
should.
of there. You're not a cop.
Absolutely, as you should. And so, but again, when you look at the perception of Trayvon by Mr. Zimmerman and the whole issue, it was terrible. And so what the group set out to do was to say, hey, you need to take a good look at this, because this makes no sense.
Right.
And as you move forward in time, when you're looking at the shooting that happened in South Carolina, some of the incidents that happened in some of the major cities across the country, in Baltimore and other places, what the group is saying is you need to look at these situations and figure out why this keeps happening. You're absolutely right, Ambezi. You have folks in the community that's being impacted that'll jump on the bandwagon and say, hey, this is what I heard. Don't have fact, or fiction.
Right.
But they're just jumping on something because they hear people are protesting.
And that's when the accreditation starts going.
That's exactly right.
It's not, and it sucks because it's not their fault at core. It's not their fault at core. But like I said, and back to what Money Marv said, the social media and the age surrounding us that can dictate how we interact with things is a blessing and a curse. Sure
it is. And I think the more that you can expose an issue, the better opportunity you have to correct it.
Right.
And certainly the protests that the Black Lives Matter have been engaged in have refined themselves since they first started. Because, again, you had people that were in there. They saw an opportunity for chaos, and they blended in with the Black Lives Matter folk and were doing all kinds of ridiculous things, vandalizing cars, shooting people, looting stores. And that's not what they're about. Let's make that very clear. They are protesting. They're doing it peacefully, but yet, just like any other organization, they have folk that say, oh, wow, there's a protest. Let me go in here and act a fool.
Right.
Which absolutely distracts from the message that the group is trying to portray. And certainly, as long as they continue to protest peacefully, to be up on the issues, as long as they remain factual, I think that they will be able to make some good changes, not just for African Americans, but for everyone.
Right.
Because let's use a police situation. If a police department, as a result of protests, not only from Black Lives Matter, but from the community as a whole, it results in better training, better interaction, and better cohesion building between the police and the community, everyone wins.
Right.
That's not just a black thing. Being treated well by law enforcement is not just a black thing. Having the opportunity to have a good wage and take care of your family is not a black thing.
Right.
That's a people thing. That's an American thing. And so I think that any group that at their core is willing to abide within the social mores and raise awareness of issues, I think that's good for everyone.
Yeah.
Now, don't let the title fool you. What they were saying by Black Lives Matter, they were saying that it appears that with all these incidents that black lives don't mean much and black lives matter. You know, you shouldn't have to qualify with Black Lives Matter too.
Right.
You know, because that's not what they're saying. And so, but again, I think everyone